Hey guys, imagine sneaking into a medieval castle during Christmas. No armored guards or roaring fires. Just a quiet, almost secret celebration tucked away behind stone walls thicker than your grandma's Thanksgiving gravy. Yep, while fairy tale movies show grand feasts and jolly kings, the truth is, a lot of these fortresses kept things surprisingly subdued. As the winter inward grew colder, and the snow outside thickened into silent drifts, Master Cook Aldrich stood in the dim glow of the hearth, unpacking dried herbs and stale grains with deliberate care. The grand Christmas feast, once a vibrant celebration of abundance, now seemed restrained by the quiet weight of unyielding weather. The kitchens were filled with the faint scents of stale bread and dried herbs, a reminder of supplies slowly dwindling. The household staff moved with a slow, measured rhythm, each small motion echoing the slow passage of time and the approaching holiday. Despite the scene's muted patience, a sense of gentle purpose lingered in the air, an enduring human effort beneath the surface of austerity. As days progressed, the familiar sense of celebration was replaced by some unspoken tension. The snow blocked the supply routes, and the larders seemed to tighten. Aldrich's apprentices hesitated as they measured out the last handfuls of dried beans and bits of salt, quietly aware of the shifting necessity to ration. The castle's walls, once lively with the hum of preparation, now echoed with the occasional muffled footsteps and soft whispers. The ornate plans for a festive meal quietly dissolved into modest offerings, stale bread, boiled vegetables, and whatever herbs lingered. The irony was almost palpable. In a season of giving, they were forced to carve back, to create a humble feast from restraint rather than abundance. Occasionally, in the low evening light, someone would murmur about the old times, their words drifting like the faint curl of smoke from the hearth. Aldrich chuckled softly at the thought, a small grimace hidden behind a blurred line of his face as shadows fell across his brow. The grand feast had become a quiet ritual of adaptation, boiling what could be spared, slicing thin what seemed like too little. The Lord's household, once eager for richness and variety, now looked toward modest stews and simple cakes, touched by a humor born of necessity rather than joy. The irony was bitterly gentle. They celebrated with less, yet still managed occasional small pleasures, as if remembering that human warmth could thrive even in limits. With time, a calm settled like dust on the surfaces, an acceptance of the slow, unalterable strain. The kitchen staff, weary but composed, moved through their routines without flourish, knowing that tomorrow might bring more hardship or perhaps just quiet endurance. Aldrich's face, blurry and blurred at the edges, held a quiet humility, questioning little, observing much, weighing tradition against survival. The warmth of the hearth continued to flicker softly, casting gentle shadows that danced like old memories on the stone walls. Their careful silence, punctuated only by the soft sounds of stirring and simmering, became a kind of quiet prayer to persevere amid austerity. In the end, the season pressed on, not with excess, but with a gentle, practiced patience, an acknowledgement that even in hardship, some small human acts persisted. The castle's kitchen, in its modest humility, became a quiet monument to resilience and adaptation, where the mundane routine retained a strange dignity. Perhaps, in these subtle acts, stirring pots, cutting bread, sharing silent looks, there was a quiet reminder of the simple human need to carry on, unnoticed yet unbroken, as the snow continued its silent vigil outside, and the last ember faintly glowed. The story settled into a gentle stillness, an ordinary testament to the endurance of everyday life, even when the feast was small and the nights long. As the snow settled lightly on the stone battlements, Aldrich and Elise moved quietly through the castle's shadowy corridors, beginning their quiet preparations for the Yuletide. Behind a heavy oak door in the pantry, they painstakingly kneaded spiced bread dough, the warm scents mingling with the faint chill of the stone walls, all while guards patrolled in slow, measured steps just outside. Along the battlements, thin sprigs of pine were draped carefully, their glossy needles catching the faint glow of a distant fire. As if reluctant to make any sound that might betray their efforts, in the dimness, they rehearsed a muted carol, lips barely moving, voices almost lost in the soft crackle of the hearth below. Even for this fortress of stone and steel, it was a moment of delicate, covert hope, an understated nod to the season's silent, enduring spirit. As days grew shorter and the castle's routines settled into a predictable rhythm, the quiet preparations took on an unintended tension. The guards, conscientious in their patrols, occasionally paused at doorways, as if sensing something unspoken, though never quite catching it. The faint rustle of pine and the faint aroma of baking loaves seemed to carry a subtle weight, reminding everyone that here, even in secrecy, anticipation lurked beneath calm facades. Aldrich's hands trembled slightly as he hung the last of the pine boughs, mindful of every breath, every shadow cast on the stone walls. The muted carol rehearsal became a fragile act, a whispered ode that might be lost in the air before it even reached the ears of the distant prophets' blurred faces, hidden behind veiled images of divine wisdom and silence. A quiet irony began to settle over the castle's seasonal efforts. While they prepared in secret, the world outside remained unaware of their humble defiance against the relentless march of time. The baked loaves cooled on rough wooden tables, their spicy aroma a silent toast to shared hopes that wouldn't be spoken aloud. Elise glided past a window, watching the faint glow of distant lanterns, her expression faintly amused by how seriously they took this small act of defiance. The muted carol, now somewhat tentative, was softly hummed under her breath, its simplicity underscoring how human actions, no matter how small, could carry a flicker of warmth through stone and shadow. The castle, for all its grandeur, was just another quiet vessel holding fleeting human longing. Gradually, the castle settled into a serene stillness, as if the act of silent preparation had woven a calm that tenderly embraced its stone walls. The pine boughs swayed gently on the battlements, their scent lingering in the cool air, a whisper of nature's patience amidst human effort. Guards continued their rounds with composed indifference, and the faint echo of the Christmas carol drifted into the quiet nights, barely audible, and yet somehow enough. Aldrich and Elise, now satisfied with their humble rituals, paused in the shadowed kitchen, their faces touched with a gentle, even humorous sense of accomplishment at the quiet rebellion against a world that demanded loud celebrations. In this quiet, they found a strange peace, knowing that the true essence of the season lay in simple, almost imperceptible moments of kindness and hope. As Christmas approached in its silent, unassuming way, the castle seemed to exhale softly, the traditions tucked into its ancient bones like a well-kept secret. The baked loaves, the pine boughs, the faint echo of the muted carol, all spoke quietly of the perseverance of small human gestures amid the relentless passage of time. The faces of prophets and holy figures remained blurred and distant, perhaps unaware of the modest human stories unfolding below their obscured images. In the stillness of night, the castle rested, embodying a quiet resilience that was at once humble and profound, a testament to the simple, unspoken hope that lingers in the peace before dawn. And so, in their calm preparations, Aldrich and Elise found the quiet joy of keeping Christmas alive in their own understated way. As twilight settled over the ancient stone walls, the castle's inhabitants moved quietly through their routines, mindful of the subdued atmosphere that Christmas brought. Small, handcrafted tokens, clay figurines, carved wood, embroidered cloth, found their way into hidden corners of the great hall, exchanged with faint smiles and gentle touches, wrapped in the silence that had become a shared tradition. The flicker of candlelight cast soft shadows on old tapestries, and the air carried a faint scent of dried herbs and wax. Outside, the faint, muffled sounds of the distant town blurred into the stillness, emphasizing the sanctuary of their quiet observance. It was a time for modest gestures, for preserving a fragile sense of connection amid the slow passage of days, with no need for loud celebrations. On the evening of Christmas Eve, the tension in the castle was almost perceptible, wrapped in the weight of unspoken expectations. Maud, the gentle lady of the castle, carried a single candle into the small chapel, her fingertips faintly trembling as she lit it, her only gesture of hope. The muted choir gathered in a loose circle, their voices whispering verses that floated like distant bells, almost lost in the space between sound and silence. The blurred faces of prophets and saints gazed down from faded tapestries, their presence felt more than seen, as if observing a sacred but unspoken act. The temperature was chilly, but the small flickering flame offered a fragile warmth, embodying the quiet devotion that had become their festive ritual. This fragile act of light and sound seemed both deeply personal and profoundly collective, a silent acknowledgement of the season's gentle significance. A slight irony settled as, throughout the castle, small wooden figures and fragile gifts sat untouched in their secret hiding spots, waiting patiently for the morning that might never bring the loud joy of other times. Servants moved with practiced monotony, their hands deftly arranging decorations that no longer sparkled with exuberance, but whispered stories of simpler times. The quiet choir's whispers often overlapped with the wind outside, creating an oddly humorous cacophony, like an out-of-tune concert that nobody dared to clarify. Beneath the subdued festivities, a faint smile lingered, perhaps amused by their own restraint, recognizing the absurdity in attempting to imitate jubilance through mere silence and shadows. It was a peculiar kind of celebration, softly humorous in its own understated way, as if the castle acknowledged its own stubborn serenity. As midnight passed into the early hush of dawn, the castle's occupants settled into a calm acceptance, the quiet lingering like the fading glow of a candle. The gifts remained wrapped in plain cloth, the choir's whispers dimmed into hushed memories, and Maud's candle burned low, casting a gentle glow on the worn stone floors. Outside, the world was somber but still, and within these walls, the slow rhythm of quiet tradition persisted. Despite the lack of grand spectacle, there was comfort, an understanding that this silent season was enough, its understated presence a subtle form of devotion. The faces blurred by light seemed to smile slightly, acknowledging the quiet beauty hidden in patience and ordinary human gesture. In the quiet, there was a peaceful dignity, an unspoken appreciation of the simple act of being present in the stillness of history's slow, unhurried Christmas. Later In the soft silence of the morning, the castle felt both tired and content, having shared a Christmas that was neither loud nor ornate, but deeply human. The wrapped gifts remained untouched, memories of quiet exchanges etched into the cornerstones of tradition, small acts that defined their season. Maud, now seated in the drafty chapel, looked upon her now unlit candle, her face gentle behind a shadow of light. The figures and whispers of yesterday now seemed like faint echoes of a story that would quietly continue tomorrow, with no need for grand gestures. The castle seemed to breathe in a slow, steady rhythm, embracing the mundane beauty of their modest observance. In this unassuming stillness, perhaps the greatest lesson lay, not in the noise or spectacle, but in the delicate, human choice to celebrate softly, in a quiet, enduring hope. On a cold winter evening within the stone embrace of a medieval castle, the hall was quietly settling into a gentle pause. The flickering glow of small candles cast soft shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and villagers moved with deliberate, subdued motions, moving side to side, placing a loaf on a rough wooden table, exchanging murmured greetings. Outside, the distant chime of a church bell signaled the approaching midnight. But here, the atmosphere remained calm, almost hesitant, as if mindful of the sacred silence that Christmas brought in its own understated way. There was no grand feast, only the simple act of passing a lantern among friends, as if lighting a path through shared quietness rather than celebration. The castle's ancient stones seemed to hold their breath, watching human routines weave their faint, earthy magic into the cold night. As the clock neared midnight, a lone lantern was gently handed from one hand to another, its faint warmth contrasting with the cool, damp air seeping through the cracks in the stone. The lantern's small flame bobbed softly, casting a dim circle of light that danced across the uneven floor, illuminating the cracked tiles and the tired faces of workers and family members. An unspoken tension lingered, perhaps a sense of reverence, or simply the quiet pressure of tradition to honor the night without fuss or extravagance. The hall observed these small exchanges, each movement slow and purposeful, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment in a world that thrived on routines. Even the muted, distant sounds of the castle, settling into its own slow rhythm, contributed to a tense, expectant hush. Then, in an almost ironic twist of solemnity, the Lord himself stepped forward, cloaked in a simple tunic, and carrying a modest crown of evergreen, an understated gesture rather than ostentatious grandeur. His face was blurred by the flickering candle light, an anonymous silhouette that carried the weight of many years of silent ruling and quiet nights. With a measured, almost weary voice, he softly acknowledged the modest gathering and the quiet celebration unfolding in this forgotten corner of the world. The act was neither grand nor ostentatious. Instead, it was imbued with gentle irony, the realization that, amid centuries of wealth and power, these moments of shared restraint carried as much meaning as any elaborate festival. Everyone listened in still silence, kernels of unspoken gratitude passing through the room like a subtle breeze. The night moved forward with a calm that seeped into every corner of the hall, as the small community found a muted peace in their humble observance. The lantern was set down gently on a bench, its light now steady and soft, a quiet anchor amid the subdued murmurs of conversation and the faint scrape of chairs. Outside, the cold persisted, but inside, the warm quiet of shared human imperfection offered a kind of solace. There was no need for embellishment. The simplicity of the evening was enough to connect souls who had long since accepted the slow, inevitable passage of time. A faint aroma of bread and wood smoke filled the air, blending with the hushed, contented presence of those who knew that even silent celebrations carried a depth surpassing words. In the end, the scene settled into a gentle reflection, perhaps a day's worth of unspoken stories, tiny acts of patience, and the quiet acknowledgement that human celebrations, even in the grand stone silence of a castle on Christmas, hold meaning in their mere, enduring normalcy. As the figures stood quietly, few eyes met from face to blurred face, all sharing in the unpretentious, timeless act of simply being present. The night, with all its humble stillness, reached a point of almost peaceful exhaustion, reminding those there that life's quietest moments often carried the greatest weight. And so, the castle's silent walls kept their watch, patiently awaiting dawn, embracing the soft irony that in silence, perhaps, lies the true depth of human connection. As dawn approached the stone walls of Ravenshoeld, a gentle hush fell over the courtyard, broken only by the faint crackle of straw bedding and the soft whispers of winter wind through narrow windows. The castle, quiet in its own deliberate way, began to stir slowly as cooks lightened their fires, and a faint aroma of fresh bread wafted through the halls. The Lord, draped in simple woolen robes, sat silently in the great hall, gazing at the faint flicker of candlelight, perhaps pondering whether this day, in its stillness, held more than mere routine. Outside, the land stretched in calm, frosted fields, waiting for the sun to fully rise. Inside, a sense of fragile peace seeped into every corner. It was a day that asked for little, just the quiet acknowledgement of another year's turning in their modest, enduring world. By mid-morning, the castle's residents moved cautiously through their daily tasks, their footsteps muffled on cold stone. Silver kettles hummed softly on fires, and the soft scrape of wood against cloth marked preparations for a modest feast, nothing grand, just enough to mark the occasion without exuberance. Children, bundled in rough-spun garments, peered at the flickering shadows cast by candles, their faces blurred by the soft glow, eyes distant yet attentive. The air was filled with the quiet sound of handwork, sewing, polishing, the odd murmured song, all performed with a restrained patience that was both weary and warm. It was the kind of day that revealed human persistence in simplicity, calm, unspoken, almost meditative, as if time itself had decided to slow down for a moment's grace. Yet amid this still serenity, an undercurrent of ironical modesty persisted. The castle's great hall was modestly decorated with greenery looted from the woods, sketched out arrangements that looked more hurried than inspired, despite the effort to create festivity. A faint sense of routine overshadowed genuine celebration. Even the noble faces of unseen prophets, blurred behind the flickering candle glow, seemed to wear an expression of quiet indifference rather than divine joy. Perhaps they too understood that the true significance lay not in elaborate displays, but in the humble labor and shared silence that tethered everyone together, reminding even the most serious that human effort often lingers quietly on the edge of laughter and melancholy. So life, as always, proceeded in soft routines, with irony hidden in the fact that nothing needed to be extraordinary for it to feel meaningful. As the day wore on, the castle settled further into its peaceful rhythm. Meals were shared without haste, and the silence deepened, wrapping around the cold stone like a thick blanket. Gentle conversations drifted like slow clouds, measured and unhurried, while the small candle flames danced in the shadows, casting the rooms in a warm, amber glow. Outside, the snow continued to fall in gentle swirls, muffling sounds save for the occasional distant call of a bird or the faint crack of ice. Those who gathered, members of the household or silent servants, found comfort in this ordinariness, in the quiet acknowledgement that even at the heart of such an ancient, sometimes weary place, there is a kind of sacred contentment in stillness. In this calm, they seemed to accept that life's quiet moments are often the most profound, if only one is willing to notice them. Later, as evening drew near and the castle's shadows deepened, the residents reflected in their own tranquil way, perhaps contemplating the quiet continuity of their lives, or the subtle passing of yet another Christmas. The faces that had appeared blurred by candlelight now seemed softly human, strangely familiar in their imperfections and gentle humor. The day had offered no great upheaval, only small waves of routine kindness, and the unspoken understanding that peace is often found in the mundane. They drifted towards their simple beds, the echo of a distant feast fading into the whispers of the night, knowing that tomorrow, like today, would quietly arrive, carrying only what it was meant to bring: silence, comfort, and the slow, steady passage of time in the quiet castle of Ravenshold. As the winter descended upon the stone walls of the castle, Aldrich stood quietly in the dimly lit hall, contemplating the long, frozen night ahead. Outside, the trees were silent sentinels, their limbs heavy with ice, and the rivers were closed off by thick sheets of frost. He knew that gathering food from such a landscape would be a gamble. Hunters prepared for the cold, but often returned with little more than tail ease and frostbite. So he sent a small, brave group into the frozen forest, their cloaks dusted with snow, bows and sickles in hand, faces obscured by hoods and shadow. The silence stretched between them, occasionally broken by the distant howl of wolves or the crack of icy branches, reminding everyone that unconquered nature was still watching. It was a cautious gamble, with the hope that something, however meager, might be found beneath the white, unyielding canopy. Many days passed with little but frozen spoor and empty hands, and the weather showed no mercy, with bitter winds slicing through the thickest cloaks. The hunters returned exhausted, cheeks reddened from cold and disappointment, their stories sparse and pragmatic. Without enough fresh meat or herbs, the castle's kitchens faced a grim reality. The festive season was coming, but the supplies were dwindling. Aldrich, sitting near a small fire, considered their options: preserved meats, dried fruits, and perhaps some spice substitutes to mimic fresh flavors. Balance was delicate, and each attempt to extend the food supply felt like a small act of stubborn hope against endless winter. The kitchen staff began experimenting quietly, trying to turn the limited ingredients into semblances of holiday cheer, though the flavors, much like the season, remained muted and cautious. In the quiet after the failed foraging excursions, an odd sense of irony settled over the castle staff. They were working harder to create the illusion of a feast than they had ever worked for a true bounty. Dried apples soaked in watery wine, the faint aroma of cinnamon substitutes made from common roots, and salted, preserved meats that no longer sizzled. The staff smirked softly, aware of the small absurdity. They knew everyone would taste that these efforts were humble at best. Yet it was enough to evoke a faint shimmer of holiday warmth, even as the carved wooden decorations and simple table arrangements grew more weary. The shared humor in their modest efforts offered a gentle kind of resilience. It was, perhaps, a different kind of feast, one of patience, modesty, and quiet human ingenuity. In the calm that followed, the castle settled into its winter rhythm. The energy shifted from frantic hope to silent endurance. The fires burned steadily, casting warm pools of light on the worn stone walls, and the chill outside seemed less urgent now. The few remaining supplies served as a reminder of what was left, but also of human ability to adapt and find small joys in the mundane. The hunter's sacrifices, the cook's improvisations, and the quiet patience of those inside brought a still, contemplative mood. Men and women sat in silent companionship, looking out through narrow windows, watching snow drift softly, their faces peaceful beneath their hoods. The unspoken understanding was that this season, like all others, was simply part of a long, steady cycle, accepting that some hardships are best faced quietly and with gentle humor. In retrospect, the story of the winter's silent night feast was less about triumph or tragedy, and more about the muted poetry of human persistence. With each dried fruit and battered spice, the castle's inhabitants offered small acts of hope, meager, perhaps, but quietly significant. They learned that survival was often less about the bounty of the land and more about the patience to wait and the humility to make do. Amidst the enduring cold, a subtle warmth endured, the understanding that even in the quietest, most unremarkable moments, human life finds a way to pause, reflect, and endure simply because it must. In the end, they found beauty in the understated, the everyday, and the unpretentious hum of life beneath the silent, icy stars. As the winter evening settled over the castle, the kitchen staff gathered around the long oak table, quietly discussing the upcoming silent night feast. Somewhere in the shadowed corner, a figure slipping through the fog, clutching a worn sack filled with foreign spices, hinted at secrets kept by unseen traders. The cooks, bustling softly, considered the strange offers, exotic scents of cinnamon or pepper that might warm the coldest of rooms. Yet, risk hovered like a thin electrical charge, for displeasing the Lord with an unapproved addition could mean losing favor or worse, a quiet removal from the hearth. Still, the faint aroma from outside promised a touch of warmth, a small rebellion against the rigid tastes of tradition. With hesitant glances, they wondered silently whether the small gamble was worth the fleeting promise of a richer, more memorable feast. As dusk deepened, the merchant entered, his quiet footsteps barely disturbing the heavy air. His sack, sagging slightly under the weight of vibrant, fragrant powders and dried herbs, was a paradox, an invitation wrapped in silent danger. The kitchen debated in hushed whispers, noses twitching at the faint spice scent that managed to seep into the stone corridors, despite the cautious whispers of secrecy. Some cooks saw it as a moment of silent rebellion, a whisper of the world beyond castle walls. Others feared the faint trace of risk, imagining the sharp reprimand of the Lord if discovery came. The merchant's face was mostly obscured by a shadow, its features blurred, but somehow knowing. Still, in the low light, they wondered, was the small act of daring worth the inevitable fallout? Like the faint glow of a candle flickering in cold darkness, the irony of the situation lingered as the men and women eyed the sack like an forbidden treasure. They chuckled under their breath, knowing full well that spices from distant lands had historically been symbols of both wealth and peril, traded in secret alleyways and shadowed markets. Now a simple, almost banal clandestine exchange took on a quiet humor. How such small grains held worlds of flavor and potential chaos. The kitchen's humor, soft and dry, was tinged with the absurdity of human detail, that even in a castle, a handful of foreign pepper could feel like a rebellious act. The merchant's blurred face seemed amusement enough, as if he understood the quiet comedy of their cautious deliberation. Here, amid steaming pots and bread loaves, the old joke was quietly brewing. Sometimes a little spice is all that's needed to spice up a life of routine and restraint. The decision was made to proceed, with the spices carefully tucked into a forgotten corner of the pantry, awaiting their moment of modest rebellion. The kitchen settled into a calming rhythm, hands moving in familiar motions, scents merging into an iconic smell of quiet winter celebration. The faint trace of the exotic powders seemed to settle like a secret under the flickering light, faint, almost invisible, but undeniably present. In those humble moments, the workers found a strange peace, a small, overt acknowledgement of life, beyond strict rules and routines. The blurred, unseen face of the merchant disappeared silently into the night, leaving behind only the promise of a modest, silent act, an ephemeral hint that even in this cold, regimented world, warmth and wonder still found simple ways to enter. The feast would go on, quietly tinged with the irony of careful defiance, but with a newfound layer of complexity woven into its modest fabric. As sleep settled over the castle and the last flickering candle was snuffed, the kitchen's decision lingered softly in the air, like a whisper of spice carried on a gentle breeze. It was a reminder, perhaps, that even in a world drawn with the lines of tradition and authority, human moments of quiet rebellion, small, deliberate, understated, could quietly reshape the familiar. The blurred faces and silent exchanges seemed to whisper that human imperfection, and the faint irony of risking everything for a hint of warmth, had always been part of the silent night's story. Somewhere in the shadows, the spices rested, waiting for another year, another cautious moment of human hope amidst the stillness. The castle slept, unaware of the quiet humor and calculated absurdity that, just beneath its stone walls, kept a tiny secret alive. For now, a simple spice could feel like an act of quiet rebellion, infused with nostalgia and gentle irony. As the winter evening lengthened into a quiet chill, the castle's kitchens prepared silently for the approaching feast. Bowls of barley porridge sat cooling on rough wooden tables, while a single roasted pheasant, glazed with honey and cinnamon, rested on a chipped ceramic plate, its aroma faint yet persistent. The cooks moved with gentle familiarity, their movements unhurried, mastering the slow rhythm of an ancient, unchanged routine. Outside, the candlelit hall waited patiently, shadows flickering softly against stone walls, as everyone anticipated the modest but heartfelt celebration. It was a moment of shared calm, simple, human, and carefully woven into tradition amidst the cold borealis of the night. Just as the cooks carried the last trays of food toward the great hall, a sharp clang and a muffled alarm shattered the quiet. An unexpected fire had sparked in a forgotten corner of the kitchen. Sparks danced briefly, illuminating the faces of those caught in their work, their eyes widening in momentary surprise. The hurried shouts and hurried dashes of water were too late. The fire was subdued as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind a faint smell of burnt wood and a ripple of startled silence. The guests, gathered in anticipation, were unknowingly caught in a pause of collective uncertainty, an awkward, almost comic interruption that softened the solemnity of the night. The evening's simple hopes had suddenly marked a tiny mark of human imperfection. As the flames flickered into memory, the castle's steward merely shrugged, offering a tired smile as the cook brushed ash from her sleeve. The hall's candles remained steady, their glow undisturbed by the minor chaos, and conversations quietly resumed, soft exchanges of well-worn stories about past holidays and vanished seasons. The meal was hurriedly laid out on a single, now slightly scuffed side table. The glazed pheasant and barley porridge presented with a dash of irony as everyone chuckled faintly about the night's unintended delay. The fireplace's warm comfort persisted, and the hum of quiet laughter blended with the crackle of remaining embers. The humans, in their imperfection, continued to find nourishment in their routines, however disrupted they might be. Eventually, the hall settled into a stillness that felt almost sacred, punctuated only by the soft flicker of candles and the faint scent of spiced food. The guests, now seated quietly beneath the gentle, wavering light, looked around at faces blurred by the soft glow, each one carrying the gentle weight of age and small regrets. The night had learned humility, reshaped by a brief fire, reminding everyone that even in moments of calm, human effort carried its quiet flaws. Outside, a light snowfall began, muffling any remaining sounds, as if the world itself paused to reflect. Here, amid simple food and soft shadows, life's fleeting perfection felt a little more fragile, delicate, and quietly profound in its impermanence. Years later, the stories of that silent night would drift into memory, told in hushed tones as peaceful pauses before sleep. The blurred faces in the candlelight, the odd sparks of fire, and the humble feast all became parts of a quiet tradition, reminders that even the most ordinary moments can hold a small, unspoken grace. The castle's kitchens continued their work, gradually returning to their usual rhythm, while the hall embraced the calm after chaos. It was, perhaps, a reminder of the gentle human tendency to adapt and find peace in imperfect scenes. Humble tailies etched softly into the history of silent, simple holidays, and as sleep quietly settled over the land, so too did the unremarkable, enduring comfort of human resilience and quiet hope. Long before the modern holiday rush, the castle kitchens were a quiet haven where cooks moved with muted purpose, preparing the familiar seasonal ingredients that defined their modest celebrations. The air carried a faint, warm scent of dried herbs and baked bread, settling into the stone walls with a calming familiarity. It was during these calm preparations that the Lord, observing the slow rhythm of daily life, paused to praise the humble feast that had become tradition, a simple gathering rooted in local preservation, yet gently touched by the occasional foreign spice brought in by wandering merchants. This acknowledgement was a small, almost tired gesture, but one that planted the seed for a new understanding that even holiday rituals could adapt, survive, and quietly evolve. As evening approached, the glow of a single candle flickered softly over cracked ceramic dishes, casting shadows that lingered in the shadows of a quiet, enduring human effort. As the seasons progressed, a subtle tension grew within the castle walls, an awareness that the old ways might falter amid changing supplies and the shifting tides of taste. The cooks, seasoned by years of routine, became more inventive with what little they had, melding local root vegetables with a rare dash of imported salted fish, just enough to remind everyone of distant shores, without disturbing the intimate, familiar flavor of their common meals. The Lord's praise for the humble feast, once spoken softly, now carried a trace of irony, recognizing their resilience. Yet quietly contemplating how these small adjustments might become too many, transforming tradition into improvisation. The faint sounds of chopping and simmering blended into a steady rhythm, echoing the quiet struggle between continuity and change in a time when scarcity demanded adaptability. And humor found its place in modesty. Eventually, the irony of the situation emerged openly in quiet council meetings, where the Lord, his face blurred and shaded beneath a heavy curtain of light, proposed that future winter celebrations incorporate both local ingredients and exotic touches, perhaps a touch of preserved citrus or a few dried fruits from distant markets. The suggestion met with nods and mild smiles, revealed a pragmatic humor, an acknowledgement that their new hybrid dinners might become more about compromise than tradition. Cans of preserved fruits and jars of dried herbs sat on the shelves, silent witnesses to the slow, steady blending of old and new tastes. The castle's long tables, once solely laden with simple roasts and bread, now hinted at exotic possibilities lurking beneath the surface, humble enough, yet quietly optimistic in purpose. In this quiet logistical dance, even the most modest of changes seemed to speak to resilience, a subtle triumph of human ingenuity over adversity. By the time the new tradition solidified, the castle kitchens had settled into a calm rhythm, an acceptance of the ongoing balancing act between preservation and novelty. The cooks moved with slightly more relaxed ease, their hands threading familiar recipes with small foreign accents in a quiet kind of pride. The Lord, a figure shadowed by the soft glow of twilight, regarded this evolving feast with unshowy satisfaction, recognizing that their modest adaptations had become a subtle but lasting legacy, an unspoken testament to resilience through simplicity. The faint clang of pots and the gentle rustle of cloth wrappers filled the space, serene and unobtrusive. On the long tables, plates of modestly spiced meats and preserved fruits sat beside rustic bread, a gentle reminder that, in the slow passage of seasons, humans find meaning in the quiet art of making do. The tradition was no longer merely about food, but about the gentle, steadfast human capacity to adapt without losing oneself in the process. In reflection, the silent night feasts grew into a symbol of quiet endurance, a subtle testament to how a simple meal could encompass both humility and hope. The castle's story, quietly recorded in the worn wood and faded tapestries, spoke of a time when human imperfection and the slow passage of days created something enduring and real. Cooks, lords, and everyday folk shared in this slow, unpretentious act of gathering each meal, a small, resilient gesture that acknowledged change, yet refused to be overwhelmed by it. As the flickering candlelight dimmed, and the castle settled into its nightly calm, the memory of these adaptive celebrations lingered like a soft hum in the distance, a gentle reminder that even in the quietest moments, human life continues with patience, humor, and quiet grace. In the quiet corners of a mountainous landscape, the old stone chapel of St. Alaric stands with a gentle patience, its walls dusted with fresh snow that muffles the world outside. Inside, Brother Eamon, with a slow, deliberate motion, spots the first faint footprints on the icy path and offers a soft nod, welcoming the solitary traveler. It is midwinter, a time when the world breathes in cold silence, and the chapel becomes a humble sanctuary of slow, deliberate prayers, silent acts measured in breath and whisper rather than noise or celebration. The faint glow of oil lamps flickers across the worn wooden pews, casting soft shadows that seem to lean in closer, eager to listen, quietly bearing witness to the slow passage of time. Here, amidst the stillness, life's more subtle prayers unfold, those that ask for patience, warmth, and the endurance of fleeting daylight. As winter deepens, the small community that once occasionally gathered now finds the chapel increasingly isolated, its existence marked by the quiet routine of midwinter observances. Brother Eamon, his face blurred in the gentle glow, tends to the tiny altar with a practiced care, aware that the few visitors who come seek not spectacle, but a pause from the cacophony of seasonal festivities elsewhere. Outside, wind whispers through the bare trees, while inside, the silence is punctuated only by the faint scratch of a pen or a slow breath. The tradition of midwinter prayers, long maintained here, becomes a subtle act of resistance, a soft refusal to drown in the noise of Christmas cheer, choosing instead the muted reflection that the rough stones and worn would hold. It is a quiet conversation with the unseen, a gesture that honors the darkness as much as the light, quietly maintaining a fragile hope. Irony drapes over this peaceful solitude like the accumulating snow. While the world bustles with lights and laughter, the chapel remains a place for gentle, almost humorous denial. Brother Eamon, with a slightly bemused expression, sometimes observes travelers drawn by curiosity or the need for respite, often with a faint smile at the contrast between their hurried urgency and his own slow, deliberate rhythm. The unseeing face of unseen prophets gazes from faded images behind a slightly tarnished glass, as if to mock the grandiosity of human holiday plans. Here, at least, the season's paradoxes are clear. In the midst of commercial frenzy, a humble stone building quietly offers an alternative, an unspoken reminder that the The sacred can be just as simple as a snow-covered roof and a candle's flicker. Yet, amid this irony, life continues with a gentle patience, unaffected by the world's noisy demands. By the time the longest night settles in, the chapel's interior feels even calmer, a space carved out of shadows and whispered memories. Brother Eamon, now easing into his routine, notices the faint warmth of his breath mingling with the cool air. The slow drip of melting snow from the roof echoing softly like a heartbeat. Visitors are fewer now, and the slow, rhythmic prayer feels less like a duty and more like a quiet surrender, an acceptance of the season's pause. Shadows dance across the stone walls as the oil lamps burn lower, as if the darkness itself is listening too. In this stillness, the chapel embodies a gentle testament to imperfection. That enduring silence can be a form of both resilience and quiet comfort, offering a humble counterpoint to the world's restless noise. Looking back on the small chapel, one might see not just a structure of stone and wood, but a vessel designed for quiet reflection amid life's chaos. Brother Eamon, with his face blurred in the warm glow, perhaps wonders if these simple acts matter much in the grand scheme. A slow prayer, a shared silence, a steady gaze into unseen realms. The snow outside continues softly, unchanging, reminding us that some traditions, like the gentle observance of midwinter's quiet prayers, persist in subtle, almost unnoticed ways. It is a story not of grand miracles, but of ordinary human gestures, holding space, making room for stillness, quietly resisting the rush of seasons passing by. And so, beneath the snow veil of winter, the humble chapel waits patiently, a silent witness to the slow, unspoken human truths. In the quiet corners of the village, the chapel's heavy wooden door had long been a familiar, benign presence, whispering of simpler times. As the snow settled softly on the stone steps, villagers prepared for their midnight vigil, each person clutching a cup of warm tea and a flickering candle. Inside, the air held a faint mustiness, mingling with the faint scent of pine and old paper remnants of centuries of quiet prayer. Eamon, the local historian, lingered near a dusty shelf, noticing an aged ledger tucked away in a forgotten corner, its pages yellowed and fragile. It was an unassuming find, yet as he held it, he wondered what stories of muted devotion and long-lost rites it might reveal under the flickering light. As the vigil commenced, a sudden gust of wind rattled the stained glass windows, and outside, a sudden storm cloaked the village in darkness and cold. The roads quickly became impassable, isolating the tiny chapel in an unexpected silence that pressed against the stone walls like thick winter blankets. The villagers looked at each other with hesitant glances, their questions about the relevance of lone, silent worship unwinding beneath the uneven flicker of their candles. Eamon's gaze shifted to the ledger, its words beckoning from beneath layers of dust, an echo of generations who had also faced long winter nights with quiet observances. A moment of shared doubt lingered, silent and still, in the shadowed corners of the old chapel. The irony of the evening settled softly over the group. In a world that cherished noise, festivals, carols, roaring fires, their little gathering, meant to be hushed and contemplative, now seemed oddly trivial against the storm's ferocity. Eamon chuckled quietly to himself, thinking how much history had been marked not by celebration, but by moments of stillness, invisible and unobtrusive. The flickering candles cast gentle shadows on the worn pews, each face touched with a look of mild bemusement, as if humanity's need for audible joy obscured the quiet depths that had sustained countless ancestors. Outside, the wind's unrelenting whisper reminded everyone that their little vigil was a fragile thing, soft, fleeting, yet curiously persistent in the face of relentless storm and doubt. Calm gradually seeped into the battered night as the storm's rage waned and the village's collective breath settled into a quiet rhythm. Inside the chapel, the people shifted toward a peaceful acceptance, their doubts softened by the gentle weight of shared presence and unspoken history. The ledger, now placed open on a wooden table, revealed faded sketches of ancient rites, small offerings, silent prayers etched into fragile ink, each a testament to the enduring human desire to find meaning in stillness. The faces around the room, calm and friendly, seemed to accept that even in silence, there was a form of conversation between past and present, between doubt and hope, between humanity and the eternal quiet. Outside, dawn hinted softly at the horizon, a slow promise of new light and reasoned grace, reflecting on the night's quiet disturbances. The villagers realized that perhaps the true significance of their midwinter vigil was not in the words spoken or sung, but in the simple act of being present in a fleeting season of darkness. Eamon closed the ledger gently, a faint smile touching his lips as he thought of the countless silent nights endured by those before him, each one quietly shaping the passage of time. The chapel, with its worn stones and flickering candles, stood as a subtle reminder that human pursuits, whether loud or hushed, are all part of a slow, ongoing story. In this stillness, there was a kind of humility, an acceptance that the past often whispers softly, more to be listened to than shouted at, in the gentle language of quiet devotion. As the winter darkness drew in, the small village's chapel stood quietly at the center, its windows faintly glowing with the flicker of distant candles. Villagers gathered each evening, their footsteps soft against the snow-dusted stone, to share in silent prayers that had become a gentle ritual against the encroaching cold. The air was thick with a calm expectation, the kind born from years of year-end, quiet observances that required little more than shared breath and hushed hope. Outside, the wind sighed, occasionally rattling the thin wooden shutters, but inside, the community's stillness offered a fragile comfort, an unspoken agreement to wait patiently through the long, dark night. Still, beneath that calm, a subtle sense of unease lurked as the storm outside intensified, threatening the small supplies and casting shadows over the faint candle flames. With each passing hour, the storm grew more relentless, its howling wind pounding against the chapel's walls, while the villagers' murmurs softened into uncertain silence. Supplies had run low, no more firewood, no fresh provisions, and some voices began to whisper of abandoning the vigil, of seeking warmth and safety away from the helpless glow of candlelight. Tension unfurled quietly among the group, eyes fixed on the flickering flames that seemed to flicker more weakly with every gust. Yet, amid the rising anxiety, Mara, a lone pilgrim whose face was shadowed by the dim light, remained unusually composed, listening to the collective worry. Her presence seemed suddenly to hold a forgotten stillness, as if the very act of waiting had tempered the storm's noise with patience rather than panic. As the voices of discontent grew softer, irony lingered like a faint smile behind Mara's calm. Many had mocked the tradition of vigil, yet now they clung desperately to it. Mara, eyes half closed, shared a story of a neighboring town that once faced a similar ordeal, where silence had become more than a quiet moment. It had become a shield. She told of the townspeople, who, by choosing stillness over noise, had managed to avoid a worse fate, their unity hidden in the quiet. The story slipped through the tense air like a small kindness, and some villagers' shoulders, previously hunched with worry, eased into cautious breaths. The irony was clear. Sometimes it was the unremarkable silence that carried the greatest strength in times of crisis, not the noise of despair or hurried escape. Gradually, the storm outside seemed to lessen, its fury waning to a muted lull that seeped into the stillness inside the chapel. The candle flames flickered sluggishly, casting gentle shadows that danced softly on worn wooden benches and weathered faces. An unspoken calm settled over the gathered few, who, despite their weariness, found a strange serenity in their shared endurance. Mara's story had rekindled a quiet hope, reminding them that stillness was not weakness, but a form of resilience often unnoticed in the hurried rush of everyday life. The night stretched languidly, and the villagers, some with eyes closed, others lost in thought, waited quietly for the dawn, each breath a soft testament to their quiet resolve. Outside, the snow muffled the world, as if even nature itself paused in respect for their patience. Looking back, the villagers learned that true strength sometimes lay in patience and silence, qualities that had quietly sustained them through the bleakest hours of winter. The storm had passed, and with its departure came a gentle clarity. Perhaps their greatest act of faith was simply to endure in calm, unspoken solidarity. Mara's story lingered in the minds of those present, a reminder that human frailty could be matched by subtle resilience, even in the darkest of nights. They would return to their routines, a little wiser perhaps in the quiet importance of stillness, knowing that sometimes the most profound acts of hope happen not in grand gestures, but in the gentle patience of those who wait. The chapel's doors, now open again to the faint dawn, quietly welcomed the promise of a new day, softly signaling that even the longest night can find its end in calm reflection and shared silence. In the quiet of midwinter, the small chapel stood as a steadfast presence on the snow-heavy landscape, its aged stones slightly obscured by frost. Inside, a few villagers gathered in subdued expectation, their breath forming fleeting clouds in the cool air, hands occasionally brushing against worn wooden pews. The sky was an unremarkable gray, a reminder that the day's dark hours stretched long ahead. For many, this was a simple act of routine, an evening when the world slowed to a gentle, almost absent hum. Amidst these ordinary moments, they prepared for a modest observance rooted in tradition, unaware that this quiet practice would soon reveal something unexpected. As the wind howled beyond the chapel walls, tension crept into the gathering. The cold seeped into fingers and toes, and the priest, a figure hidden behind a shadowed face, struggled to recall the usual toll of the ancient bell. Suddenly, amidst the hum of whispered prayers, a familiar sound broke the silence. The long-dormant bell latched into memory, unexpectedly tolling with a deep, resonant chime. A mixture of surprise and reverence rippled through the small crowd, their eyes fixed on the distant, shadowed tower. For a moment, the natural hardships of the season seemed to pause, as if the very cold air carried a message suddenly made audible, uniting them in a shared, collective pause. It was an irony that no one could quite explain. How an ancient, silent bell could suddenly ring out in the middle of a storm, stirring some from their sleepy restraint. Faces that had been wearied by cold and routine softened into muted astonishment, while the flickering candlelight cast soft shadows that danced across plain walls. The The villagers instinctively joined in a hushed chant, their voices tentative but steady, as if following an unspoken, sacred script. The moment carried a quiet humor, how human expectancy often slipped into the absurd, expecting nothing, and then being unexpectedly pierced by a symbol long thought dormant. Still, beneath this irony, there was a gentle reassurance that sometimes, even in the most mundane of nights, unexpected signs emerged. As the toll faded into the evening's quiet, a serene calm settled in within the chapel, like a gentle retreat after a brief storm. The community's collective breath slowed, and their voices quieted into a shared silence that felt almost sacred in its simplicity. The warm glow from a few flickering candles filled the space with a soft light, nothing grand, just enough to sort through their thoughts and the lingering chill. The unseen faces of prophets and sacred figures remained concealed, shadows behind veiled light, observing from an unknowing distance. In these still moments, the ritual felt less like a gathering and more like a peaceful pause, a moment to accept the ordinary and the mysterious alike without fuss or expectation. Years later, those who remembered would speak of that night as a quiet, weightless moment, a reminder that even in the coldest, most routine times, subtle revelations could stir the soul. The absent, blurred faces of prophets murmured in the background, shadows flickering softly against the stone walls, invisible but somehow present. The community's simple act of gathering in winter's grip had woven itself, perhaps unknowingly, into the quiet fabric of their shared history, and in the gentle aftermath, they found reassurance not in grand gestures, but in the subtle, unspoken harmony of a night that had, in its own still way, become a small, enduring miracle. In the quiet months of midwinter, the villagers often found solace not in bustling markets or festive gatherings, but within the still walls of their humble chapels. These small spaces, dimly lit by flickering candles, became sanctuaries where silence stretched comfortably, granting space for collective reflection and gentle prayer. It was here, amid worn wooden benches and faded icons, that a tradition quietly persisted, an unspoken acknowledgement of the season's slow turn and the importance of stillness. As days shortened and snows blanketed the landscape, the act of coming together in quiet prayer offered a subtle sense of continuity and stability amid nature's subdued rhythm. It was a simple, enduring gesture, easily overlooked, yet deeply woven into the fabric of their yearly cycles. Over time, the fragile balance of these contemplative moments was tested as voices grew softer and the season's demands pressed into the daily routines. Some villagers, caught in the hollow noise of modern life, questioned the necessity of such quiet observances, their minds busy with other urgent tasks. Cold mornings often found fewer faces in the chapel, as the tension between tradition and change subtly crept in, shadowing the soft glow of candlelight with doubt. Yet even amid these quiet tensions, the essence of the practice remained, a subtle reminder that some aspects of human life thrive precisely in the stillness. It was as if, beneath the surface, many knew that these moments of silence held a quiet truth, one less about religion and more about holding space for human vulnerability. Ironically, in a world that often celebrated loud acts and grand gestures, the quiet prayer within the chapel became an unintentional act of defiance, a small rebellion against the chaos of daily life. Sometimes, villagers would joke about their own reluctance to sit still, as if the stillness itself might be caught and passed around like a secret. On particularly cold mornings, the silence inside would feel almost palpable, broken only by the occasional creak of wooden floorboards or the faint murmur of a prayer slipping from unseen faces behind blurred veils of light. Their reflections, blurred and unseen, seemed to drift like smoke through the cool air, still, elusive, and quietly unchanging. It was in these subtle ironies that the true charm of their modest tradition lingered, quietly resisting the passage of time. Gradually, as the storm passed and dawn stretched pale tendrils over the frost-kissed fields, the villagers emerged from their homes, eyes catching the glint of the rising sun. The chapel doors, creaking softly, welcomed those who carried with them renewed reassurance, an understanding that these small acts of stillness, however simple, wove a fragile but vital thread through their community's life. The sun's bright yellow light touched the stone walls, casting gentle shadows over worn hands clasped briefly in prayer. No trumpet sounded, no bells rang. The quiet dignity of their observance persisted quietly beneath the early light, as if to remind themselves that some traditions are best left unspoken at dawn. In this calm renewal, they found a quiet gratitude for what had endured and what would continue. Looking back, the villagers understood that the silent prayers of midwinter were more than mere ritual. They were a testimony to resilience in its gentlest form. They pledged to shield this quiet legacy from the encroachments of haste and noise, preserving the sacred stillness for generations to come. With soft smiles, they walked away from the chapel, carrying within them a modest certainty that sometimes the most meaningful gestures require nothing more than patience and a still heart. As the world turned slowly onward, they remained quietly grateful for these moments of shared silence, small yet profound. In the slow passage of seasons, they found a subtle legacy, an unspoken promise that the stillness of their chapels would continue to offer refuge amid life's inevitable rush. In the cool, dimly lit stone corridors of Eldermore Castle, Lady Isolde stood softly by her window, watching the faint frost cling to the parapets. The approaching winter solstice brought a quiet rhythm to the castle's daily hum, with servants gathering fabric and furniture in modest preparation. Her gloved hand traced the outline of a simple, woven cloak, one intended more for comfort than display, a small act of dignity amid the chill. In these quiet moments, she reflected on the chorus of familiar routines, the clatter of pots, the shuffle of feet, and the distant call of the steward checking stock. The air carried a faint sense of anticipation, yet also the calm acknowledgement that winter, with all its austerity, was just another chapter in their ongoing story of human resilience. As the days shortened, the castle's atmosphere shifted with subtle tension, faint footsteps in hallways, hushed discussions over the placement of hearth supplies, and the slow gathering of cloaks and caps by each chamber door. The steward, a cautious man with a lined face, moved quietly among the storerooms, ensuring the winter provisions were enough, though he seemed more resigned to the routine than hopeful. The modest festive rites were slowly taking shape, a simple arrangement of dried herbs and woven ribbons, an attempt to bring some warmth into the cold stone halls. Outside, the wind sighed against narrow windows. Inside, the faint rustle of fabric and the low murmur of plans filled the space with an understated purpose. Yet beneath it all, a small irony persisted. Grand celebration was a distant memory, replaced by the steady, unglamorous necessity of endurance. The seamstress, a quiet woman with gentle hands, arrived with bundles of coarse fabric and thread, her face mostly hidden in a shadow. As if embarrassed by her modest craft, she chuckled softly at the idea of festive finery, remarking that this year's attire was more about covering than celebrating. Her needle moved slowly, punctuating the silence, stitching together simple cloaks and gloves that would keep the household from frozen fingers. Meanwhile, the young squire, dressed in his best, but plainly enough watched, with a mixture of earnest concentration and mild boredom, perhaps wondering what the holiday truly meant beyond the weariness of winter. Ironically, despite their efforts for modest ornamentation, the true elegance lay in the shared routine, another small act of human normalcy amid the slow approach of cold and darkness. Still, a faint humor lingered. Even the modest festivity was an event characterized by careful, deliberate insignificance. As the solstice drew nearer, the castle settled into a quiet rhythm of preparation and reflection, the candles flickering softly on rough-hewn tables. Lady Isolde's household moved with a calm, almost ritualistic patience, each person going about their tasks with a gentle, sleepy efficiency. The cold seemed to seep into bones, yet in this stillness, a soothing sense of continuity persisted. Each thread, each meal, each small gesture contributing to the gentle tapestry of winter life. The decorations, sparse as they were, added a quiet charm, withered herbs tied with humble ribbons, reminding everyone that even in austerity there was a slow kind of grace. In moments of pause, one could almost hear the distant, indifferent sigh of the stone walls, witnesses to countless seasons passing in unspoken, stubborn endurance. In the quiet aftermath of the festivities, the castle remained wrapped in a soft stillness, the kind that lingers long after the last candle flickers out. Lady Isolde, seated in her chamber, looked around at her humble, carefully arranged belongings, appreciating the small triumph of keeping warmth and dignity alive amid inevitable cold. Outside, the winter now wove its slow, unchangeable pattern, darkness stretching longer each day. Yet, within, life persisted quietly, with no grand spectacle needed. The modest attire, simple yet functional, embodied a subtle human resilience, serving as a reminder that even in the most modest of times, life finds a way to carry on with quiet humor and steady grace. Perhaps, in the slow, unremarkable passing of these days, there was a kind of peace, an understanding that human endurance is its own silent celebration. In the quiet hours of winter, the castle's chambers and corridors echoed softly with the rustling of rough woven wools and the faint crackle of fur-lined garments. Isolde's seamstress, Master Rowan, moved deliberately among bolts of fabric, explaining the ancient codes that dictated modesty, how patterned embroidery and layered textures served as silent symbols of piety and propriety. The castle folk dressed with a measured reverence, each stitch and hem embodying a balance between warmth and modesty. As the cold winter winds pressed endlessly against stone walls, it was a slow, understated ritual, carrying the weight of tradition in every thread, every cautious fold. Outside, the flickering candlelight caught on worn leather and soft linen, whispering stories of generations quietly woven into daily dress. One day, as Isolde's apprentice, the young squire hesitantly approached Master Rowan with a bundle of the finest fabrics. The promise of rebellion flickered in his eyes. His fingers brushed against shimmering silks and vibrant dyes, hidden within the folds of old cloth stored away beneath the worktable, a secret stash gathered over seasons. With the faint hum of a distant hearth, he wondered quietly if the rules of modesty truly demanded such dull uniformity. or if they were just societal whispers held in place by tradition. The embroidered symbols of piety seemed to scold him in silent threads, yet his heart fluttered at the possibility of brightness and freedom. The garments he longed for rested out of reach, but the temptation persisted amid the steady, muted hum of daily life, amid the ongoing routines. A quiet irony settled over the castle's winter wardrobe, while the rules spoke of modesty and humility. The hidden stash of bright fabrics spoke otherwise. Occasionally, the seamstresses would sew subtle hints of color or flicks of gold into otherwise somber garb, mere whispers of defiance amid disciplined stitches. As the squire's secret grew heavier with each passing day, he couldn't help but smirk at the unnoticed comedy, a community wrapped in layers of restraint, yet secretly craving displays of joy in thread. Behind the veils of modesty, an unspoken understanding persisted that beauty and individuality could survive even within the strictest codes, if only quietly. The castle walls kept their secrets, and so did the silent, patient fabric, waiting for moments of quiet rebellion or simple humor. Over time, the weight of tradition settled into a calm rhythm, almost like a gentle tide lapping against the worn stone floors. Master Rowan, with her hands steady and faces shaded, continued her work in the soft glow of dusk, transforming modest fabrics into garments that whispered stories of faith and community without loud proclamations. The sash of embroidered symbols wrapped lightly around the squire's waist, concealing his real treasures, those vivid scraps he dared not reveal. While he learned to accept the quiet dignity of handmade simplicity, there was a peaceful acceptance in the way the castle's inhabitants navigated their modesty, knowing that the subtle, unspoken truths often lingered just beneath the surface. The cold wind outside seemed to ease, blending into the comfort of slow, familiar routines, and the silent understanding that tradition, like winter itself, had a gentle, unhurried patience. In the stillness of these winter days, the fabric of tradition lingered gently, woven into every leafless tree and every quiet breath within the castle walls. The squire, now a little older, found a soft amusement in the quiet depths of his secret stash, realizing that modesty was a flexible guide, one that allowed room for humor, for quiet rebellion, and for personal expression, however small. Master Rowan's steady hands and unchanging gaze seemed to acknowledge this with a slight, knowing smile in her eyes, even if her face remained shadowed or blurred in the flickering light. The garments, simple yet meaningful, carried the peaceful weight of the past while quietly holding space for change, like the slow drift of snow flurries outside, unnoticed but constant. And so, Beneath layers of wool and fur, beneath the gentle irony and tradition, lay the human desire to be seen gently through the ordinary course of winter's quiet life. In the quiet chamber of the castle, stillness hung in the air like a thick curtain. Cold stone walls whispered the slow rhythm of winter days. Isolde, the castle's steward, smoothed her hand over the coarse fabric of her modest gown, pondering the upcoming feast and the simple, unadorned attire that would meet tradition's calm eye. Outside, faint snowflakes drifted softly against small, narrow windows, muffling the distant sounds of servants preparing bread and ale. The winter mood held a gentle weight, unspoken yet present in the slow, deliberate movements of those who worked in the shadows. It was a time for quiet continuity, where the small rituals of castle life preserved a fragile sense of order amid the cold and dim landscape. As the days neared the feast, rumors stirred in hushed corners, whispers of a neighboring lord's plans to wear lavish, brightly colored garments, shimmering with silk and gold thread, in stark contrast to the castle's modest standards. These murmurs rippled through the council chambers, where faces remained still, but eyes flickered with a mixed tension and curiosity. Some argued that hospitality was a matter of welcoming rather than dressing, while others viewed the display as a subtle challenge, an unofficial contest of wealth and pride. Isolde listened silently, her brow gently furrowing, caught in a slow ascent of concern that tinged her thoughts like a thin streak of dawn breaking across a late winter sky. The subtle irony of the situation was not lost. Power often refused to wear its true face, yet occasionally chose ostentation as a silent declaration. The irony of the approaching feast settled softly on the castle stones, as servants prepared their simplest, warmest cloaks, unaware of the quiet debates swirling overhead. In the hall, the glow from a single, flickering candle cast long, gentle shadows. The ornate tapestries and the bright attire of potential guests seemed almost distant, an unobtrusive part of the distant story. Isolde, with her measured calm, mused that perhaps the most ostentatious display was in the restraint. How modest fabrics could carry so much weight in unspoken honor. A faint, wry smile touched her lips as she thought of the silent ballet of appearances and loyalty, where true standing was perhaps measured not by fabric, but by quiet, enduring grace. The winter's chill persisted outside, but inside, a different kind of stillness took root, one of understanding and quiet acceptance. In the slowing days after the rumors, the castle returned to its familiar rhythm, a soft lull of daily routines that needed no embellishment. Isolde found herself observing the small, mundane acts, firewood stacked in a neat pile, a child's muffled laughter echoing from distant corridors, the slow stirring of stew in a heavy pot. The tension that had once flickered like a flame was subdued, replaced by a peaceful certainty that tradition held a steadiness beyond the fleeting glint of silks and gold. Though the gossip lingered in corners like a faint scent, it no longer disturbed the steady, muted pulse of life within stone walls. Perhaps, she thought, the quiet truth was that most human disagreements, like winter itself, wane and thaw in time, leaving only the gentle reminder of resilience beneath the surface. Later, as the castle basked in a soft twilight, it seemed almost permissible to reflect on the subtle ironies woven through everyday life. How human pride often dressed itself in modesty, and humility could sometimes be a quiet, understated armor. Isolde, gazing toward the darkening sky, felt a gentle amusement at the small absurdities that marked their existence. The quiet struggles for honor, the unspoken loyalty, the small acts of kindness veiled by tradition. History moved slowly here, a steady stream of moments that never quite demanded attention, but layered themselves in memory like faint, enduring shadows. The castle's winter was neither harsh nor forgiving. It was simply there, quietly observing the day-to-day ebb and flow of human nature, with its own soft humor and gentle patience. As the shortest days of winter waned, the castle preparing for its annual solstice feast felt quietly significant. Though the preparations were modest, simple cloaks of wool, muted hues, and sturdy fabrics that spoke of practicality more than ornament. Servants moved softly through stone halls, sketches of candles flickering softly against the cold shadows, while the small group of nobles and staff silently anticipated the evening's warmth, both from the hearth and camaraderie. The squire, a young man eager yet unsure, carefully concealed beneath his cloak a stash of brightly woven fabrics, colors that he believed might liven the austerity of their dress, but which risked standing out amidst the modest crowd. Outside, the wind moaned against the battlements, unaware of the quiet tension simmering beneath the castle's tranquil exterior. The night promised no grandeur, only a faint hope that even in modesty, a touch of human color might find a way in. As the evening wore on and the feast began, the subtle discord surfaced when the squire's hidden fabrics were noticed, stray glimpses revealing streaks of amber and sky blue tucked into the folds of his cloak. The castle's master, Rowan, a tall, steady figure with quiet eyes, sensed something amiss and gently called the squire before the assembly. Silence fell softly, weighed down by the flickering candlelight and the muted clink of dishware, as the boy hesitated, cheeks dimly flushing in the cold air. Words about modesty and decorum mingled awkwardly with the boy's obvious yearning for expression, the fabric's bright fibers shimmering faintly in the shadows. A tense pause stretched across the room, the unspoken question lingering. Could one balance personal choice with the deeply ingrained values of their community? Yet, in that quiet moment, Rowan's voice offered a measured, calming gesture of compromise. Master Rowan, with the patience of an old stone beneath changing seasons, proposed an alternative, subtle, woven threads that blended into the neutral wool of their cloaks, adding just enough vibrance without violating tradition. The room's temperature seemed to shift from suspicion to reluctant acceptance as the fabrics were offered for inspection. The colors, softened by careful weaving, proved neither ostentatious nor disruptive. The boy's eyes brightened slightly, relief flickering in their depths, as the castle's members glimpsed how quiet ingenuity could bridge the divide. The conversation, now veering towards craftsmanship rather than controversy, meandered gently, like a slow stream around a hidden stone. The evening moved forward, cloaks modest in appearance, but richer in subtlety, a quiet reminder of the ongoing dance between tradition and change. As the night settled deeper into calm, the castellan's hall grew warmer, and the flickering fire cast slow-moving shadows across faces that had begun to relax. The incident, briefly sharp, now seemed distant, as if it had been a gentle ripple in the still pond of castle life, easily drowned out by the everyday rhythms of eating, laughing quietly, and sharing stories that barely touched the edges of time. The modest, woven cloaks lay silently in the corners of the room, their small bursts of color unnoticed by most, yet emblematic of a subtle shift rooted in human imperfection and understanding. The castle's inhabitants, wrapped in their simple garments, appeared more at peace, as if acknowledging that bright ideas often come quietly, woven into the fabric of ordinary life, not shouted from the rooftops. It was in this slow, unremarkable moment that harmony found its place, a gentle acknowledgement of compromise and shared humanity. Later, as the cold wind finally waned and dawn stretched soft, light across the stone walls, the castle settled into quiet reflection. The event had been small, simple, and entirely human, a reminder that modesty held room for subtle vibrance, for the quiet assertion of individual spirit within the bounds of tradition. The blurred faces of unseen prophets or sacred figures seemed distant, their visage preserved in shadow behind the flickering hearth, unmoved and unknowing of the small triumphs of human nuance. The castle, like all human places, drifted gently onward, wrapped in the warmth of compromise, and the knowledge that even in the slowest, most ordinary nights, There is a thread of quiet dignity woven softly, quietly, into the very fabric of their lives. As the first light of dawn seeped softly through the narrow castle windows, the servants gently moved among the wooden tables, their footsteps muffled by worn rugs. The final echoes of the feast faded into a calm silence, and the modest attire of Lord Eldermore drew quiet admiration, simple, yet fitting for the occasion. The colors of woven wool, earth tones, and muted reds reflected the subdued joy of winter's close, a testament to restraint rather than excess. The castle's stone walls seemed to breathe a slow, steady rhythm, as if in harmony with the quiet contentment of the household. It was a morning softly touched by humility, where the bonds of shared tradition quietly cemented the coming month's stability. Yet beneath this calm, there was a flicker of tension, the faint concern that such modesty might be mistaken for austerity, or that the season's hardships could silently press against the walls of this modest hall. Slight glances passed between the older keepers of tradition, as fingers nursed mugs of warm ale or tea, their expressions unreadable beneath the shadows of carved wooden beams. The subtle irony of their pride in restraint was not lost. It was, after all, a delicate performance, a reminder that humility often hovered close to vanity when worn as a badge of virtue. Still, they maintained their quiet composure, knowing well the comfort of routines that had outlasted many seasons of both feast and famine. A faint smile curled on the face of a young chambermaid as she adjusted her simple linen hood, eyeing the slightly too large cloak of her master, Lord Eldermore, whose modest dress seemed both a choice and a necessity. The atmosphere carried a gentle humor, as if the castle itself were in on some private joke, amused by the human tendency to find dignity in restraint. A passing servant muttered a half-hearted compliment about the weather, the words lingering in the air with a touch of irony. How the cold could be so indifferent, yet so oddly soothing. The grand tailies of courtly splendor appeared distant and unnecessary amid this scene of quiet solidarity, where humility had become a silent badge of the season's unity. In the soft light of the late morning, the castle settled into a peaceful stillness, nothing dramatic, only the faint hum of everyday life. The worn stones seemed to hold a gentle patience, and the scent of dried herbs mixed with the faint aroma of stale bread drifting from the kitchen. The modest attire, though plain, carried a dignity that was unspoken, a shared understanding that in simplicity there was strength. Beyond the open courtyard, a few snowflakes drifted lazily downward, not urgent or melodramatic, just quietly adding to the scene's calm. It was a moment, perhaps fleeting, of respite, where human imperfection lingered in the small gestures and the unpretentious grace of everyday routine. As the day waned into quiet, the castle's everyday rhythm resumed, the clock's faint ticking, the distant echo of footsteps, the soft rustle of cloaks. The celebration's echoes had faded, leaving only the understated beauty of tradition and humility. Elder Moore's balanced attire remained a gentle symbol of their collective resilience. Not ostentatious, but enough. A quiet reminder that unity often came wrapped in the simplest of garments. The castle's stones seemed to rest a little easier, its bonds strengthened by shared modesty and unspoken understanding. Looking to another winter, they found comfort in the knowledge that amid life's small absurdities, there was a peaceful constancy, an enduring reminder that humility, like the season, quietly endures. In the dimming hours of dusk, Sir Aldrich, the seasoned castellan, slowly lit the first candle of the winter solstice gathering, its flickering flame casting a gentle glow over the worn stone walls of the great hall. Lady Aloin carefully unfolded a fragile sheet of parchment, the faint sound of her voice carrying the old carols softly through the air, worn yet familiar. The troupe of minstrels and candle makers, with their hands busy and faces relaxed, moved through quiet routines that had persisted for generations, small, deliberate acts that quietly marked the passage of time. There was a sense of quiet anticipation, unspoken and weightless, that lingered as the warm amber pools of light grew more numerous. Yet, amid the meditative calm, a faint irony persisted. How these humble gestures of light and song had quietly sustained the spirit of the stone fortress for so long, unnoticed by many, yet crucial in their own modest way. As the evening deepened, a gentle tension arose, perhaps from the faint unpredictability of candle flames flickering in drafty corners, or the uncertain echoes of songs learned long ago, but now slightly faded. Lady Aloin adjusted her position, her voice cautious yet steady, as if anchoring the fragile melody against the whims of shadows and silence. Sir Aldrich observed in quiet amusement the small struggles of the performers. One forgot a line. Another let a candle sputter unexpectedly. And in that moment, the reality of human imperfection softened the solemnity. The small room, filled with soft hums and the occasional crackle of burning wax, seemed to revel in these minor flaws, as if realizing that their tradition was no grand spectacle, but a humble act of endurance. The irony lay in how this simple routine, so easily disrupted, yet persistently repeated, embodied resilience through gentle repetition, not triumph or grandeur. Gradually, the immediate tension eased into a kind of resigned acceptance, as the flickering candles began casting a steady, albeit imperfect, glow across the gathered faces. The music settled into a quiet rhythm, the words less perfect, but somehow more honest, woven into the backdrop of worn wooden beams and rough tapestry. Sir Aldrich, with his eyes half closed, found himself drifting into a state of quiet reflection, grateful for these fleeting, imperfect moments of communal warmth. Lady Eloin's voice, now calmer, carried the faint echo of melodies that felt both distant and immediate, reminders of seasons past and present, all held within the fragile web of light and song. There was no need for grand ceremonies. It was enough that the candles burned low, and that the familiar lullaby of whispered carols persisted, softly damping the cold. In this calm, the slow hum of history felt both weighty and strangely light, as if the tradition itself had learned to breathe at its own unhurried pace. Much later, as most in the hall had surrendered to sleep or silent contemplation, Sir Aldrich and Lady Eloin sat quietly beside each other, their faces softened by candle glow, both aware of the fleeting nature of these moments. The flickering flames cast long shadows that danced gently on the walls, echoing the quiet humor of their modest observance. How simple light and song could forge a fleeting sanctuary against the passage of years. The routine remained largely unchanged, yet they knew each year brought subtle shifts, the same song, the same candles, yet somehow different, touched by the passage of seasons and their own slowing steps through life. There was comfort in knowing this gentle tradition persisted, a slow-burning thread woven into the fabric of castle life, appreciated more in its quiet endurance than in any overt significance. It was, after all, a practice of unassuming resilience, endured not for spectacle, but for the quiet continuity of human routine. In the earliest hours before dawn, the hall stood silent. The last candles burned to faint stubs, their warmth lingering in the shadowed corners. Sir Aldrich and Lady Eloin remained quietly there, the memory of shared song and candlelight settling gently into their thoughts, an unspoken understanding of their humble duty. The castle, now still, seemed to inhale the slow, steady rhythm of history's calm march, untouched by the bustling world outside. These low-key traditions, modest and imperfect, formed a subtle sanctuary, proof that routine and quiet moments held their own quiet dignity. As the darkness deepened, the faint glow of residual candles flickered in their minds, like distant whispers of a human effort that knew both its limits and its quiet grace. And in that stillness, the timeless and the human found their modest, enduring peace. In the quiet hours of winter, within the stone walls of the castle, the old musicians gathered around flickering candles, their gentle carols weaving through the cool air like familiar threads. Their melodies, slow and simple, carried a quiet dignity, unseen by many, but treasured by those who listened closely. The ambience was one of subdued warmth, where the glow of candlelight cast soft shadows on time-worn faces and rough wooden instruments. It was, in essence, a routine pause, a moment for reflection amid the busy days of court life, almost unnoticed in the grand scheme of things. And yet, these small gatherings had quietly endured, a subtle testament to tradition's slow persistence against the rush of change. One day, the newly appointed steward, Lord Marin, arrived with ambitious ideas. He looked out over the familiar scene with a purposeful eye, pondering how to impress visiting nobles who valued spectacle. Without much ceremony, he proposed a lavish orchestral performance, filled with grand melodies and bright instruments, imagining how it would elevate the castle's reputation and dazzle their guests. The old musicians, whose lives revolved around their modest candlelit carols, exchanged quietly worried glances. Their gentle tunes, once enough to comfort and connect, now seemed destined to be overshadowed by the promise of brass and drums, a loud reminder of the inevitable tide of progress. In the days that followed, irony settled softly over the castle halls. The musicians watched as preparations for the grand concert unfolded. Their familiar, humble melodies became background noise, seemingly dissolving into the background of brighter banners and louder voices. A handful of old players joked with tired smiles, observing how their delicate harmonies might soon be drowned out altogether. It was a quiet conflict. What was once sacred in its simplicity now seemed just an obstacle to grandeur, a reminder of how easily tradition tips into obsolescence without any dramatic clash, just the slow and subtle erasure of quiet moments in favor of spectacle. On the night of the performance, the castle was bathed in golden light, and the air felt thicker with anticipation and the faint scent of wax and old wood. The grand orchestra played, each instrument blending into an impressive, swelling wave that filled every corner with sound. The old musicians, sitting apart, listened quietly, their faces relaxed, but a little distant, like shadows fading at the edge of a busy scene. The soft glow of candles flickered against the backdrop of booming brass, a gentle reminder of the quieter human moments that had once defined their daily life. There was a stillness in their observance, a recognition of change neither resistant nor resigned, just quietly present. Later, as the echoes of the performance dwindled and the castle settled into calm again, reflections arose softly in the quiet spaces. The old musicians returned to their simple routines, their carols temporarily silenced, but not forgotten. They understood perhaps better than anyone. That tradition was not about resisting change, but about holding onto the echoes of earlier days, even as new melodies arrived. The castle, with its flickering candles and gentle hum of distant applause, remained a place where human moments, small, imperfect, quietly enduring, told their slow, unhurried stories. In the end, it was these subtle shifts, like shadows shifting in candlelight, that kept the history quietly turning forward, step by cautious step, as the evening settled into the stone corridors of the castle. A quiet anticipation filled the air. The bustling preparation for the evening's caroling was underway. Candles flickering softly in the dim light, the minstrels, clad in simple woolen garments, arranged their instruments with deliberate calm, mindful of the fragile flames they carried, each one a tiny, hopeful glow against the approaching dusk. Outside, the first hints of a snowstorm whispered against the thick windows, muffling the usual sounds of chattering and laughter. Inside, the glow of the candles cast gentle shadows, and a sense of peaceful routine settled over the small gathering of voices and strings. Undisturbed by the world beyond, it felt in that moment like a delicate human craft, warmth carefully built in the cold chill of the winter night. Almost unaware of the quiet, creeping threat approaching from the storm, suddenly a loud gust rattled the castle walls, and the flickering candles sputtered, shadows dancing desperately before plunging into darkness. The torchlights, used to guide the way within, flickered faintly and then went out, plunging the hall into an uneasy darkness, disturbed only by the muffled sound of wind pressing against ancient stone. The minstrels scrambled in the dark, their hands trembling as they fumbled for spare candles, the cold metal of the candlesticks slipping slightly in their hurried grasp. From the corridor, distant howling wind and the pounding of snow against the windows seemed to mock the fragile human effort to maintain the intimate warmth of song. Lord Marin's voice, calm and measured, called for patience, his words barely above a whisper, though behind the shadowed, blurred face of the Lord, there was a flicker of worry beneath his composed exterior. Amid the chaos, irony settled like a soft dust. As the castle fought against the cold, the delicate ritual of singing seemed almost absurd in the dark, with every note struggling against the roar of the storm outside. The singers, now huddled close, their voices reduced to faint hums, chuckled quietly at the irony of trying to produce harmony in a pitch-black room where the flames refused to burn. The musicians, their fingers numb and clutching at dwindling candles, exchanged tired glances, each realizing how delicate their traditions truly were. Candlelit carols, so simple and rooted in ordinary human effort, now teetering at the edge of silence. The unblurred visage of the prophet's parting face flashed briefly in a corner of the mind, a reminder that even sacred symbols must sometimes be hidden in shadows, much like their flickering flames. Here, amid the shadows, the human struggle to preserve warmth and cheer played out quietly and patiently, as it had for generations. After the storm's fury waned, a calm slowly began to settle over the castle's cold stone heart. The remaining candles glowed softly again, casting a gentle, steady light that seemed to breathe new life into the gathering. The minstrels resumed their efforts, their fingers finally finding a rhythm guided by the steady, reassuring flicker of the sacrificial flames. Slowly, the voices and strings merged into tender harmonies that floated gently through the halls, less hurried and more reflective than before. An act of quiet resilience rather than celebration. Outside, the snow settled into a thick blanket over the battlements, doing little to disturb the tranquil scene within, where human warmth persisted quietly, like a slow, patient conversation with the shadows. Amidst the stillness, the faint outline of blurred prophets' faces from sacred images loomed softly in the corners, their invisible watchfulness a reminder that some traditions endure, shrouded in gentle shadows and faint candlelight. As the night deepened, the castle seemed to exhale, its ancient bones resting in quiet acceptance of the storm's retreat. Candles burned steadily now, their soft glow a subtle testament to human modesty and perseverance. The carols wove through the air, understated and unhurried, echoing the slow pace of the scene, a ritual not of grandeur, but of humble continuity. The faces of the singers, peaceful and mildly amused by their own small struggles, rested in gentle boredom, as if the entire episode was a shared, sleepy joke of history. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed, silent and indifferent, while inside, the human effort to keep the light alive endured quietly, softly illuminated by the flickering flames. An unspoken understanding that some traditions are best preserved in stillness and shadows. The blurred, unseen faces of prophets, though distant and hidden by layers of light and dark, seemed almost to nod in silent approval of this modest resilience, cradled gently in the calm of the long winter night. On a quiet winter evening within the stone walls of a forgotten castle, the flickering glow of candles cast warm, wavering circles on cold flagstones. The inhabitants, bundled in heavy fabric and slow-moving as they arranged themselves, carried a simple routine forward, an annual gathering of voices and light, as if time had settled into a gentle pause. Their faces, mostly blurred in the low light, held expressions of quiet anticipation, aware of tradition's silent weight. Somewhere, A faint rustle of parchment and soft breathing marked the start of their shared act of warmth. It was a modest occasion, yet the faint promise of something more lingered beneath the whispers of wax and stone. As silence deepened, a lone minstrel named Rowan stepped forward, bringing with him a humble lute and a breath that seemed to hold centuries of stories. His voice, steady and unassuming, rose in an ancient carol, weaving modest melodies through the chilled air, while the candle flames flickered in reaction, casting shadows like tentative friends against the tall, arched ceilings. The assembled singers, slow to respond, eventually joined in, their harmonies blending with the faint tapping of candles, filling the cold space with fragile unity. Outside, winter's breath pressed quietly on the stone, indifferent to their fragile human harmony. Even so, inside, they found a moment of flickering beauty, an ephemeral triumph of kinship over the vast quiet of history. The irony was subtle but persistent. In their earnest efforts to maintain tradition, perhaps none recognized how quietly the scene had shifted. The steward, a man with ambitions like distant echoes, watched from a shadowed corner, his eyes narrowing slightly as the singing grew louder, more confident, more daring. His plans for control, for grandeur, felt distant in this low, humble chorus that defied hierarchy with each note. The candles, flickering between defiance and fade, seemed to mock his aspirations with their steady, unspoken protest. The carol's crescendo grew, not into a spectacle, but into a soft, defiant acknowledgement that some human stories thrived precisely within quiet, unassuming moments. As the final harmonies dissolved into the stillness, there was a collective exhalation, a gentle settling back into routines that felt both mundane and sacred in their familiarity. The candle's glow softened, casting one last, tender light on faces that bore traces of age, hope, and fatigue, each at peace with the slow passage of their shared history. Rowan bowed slightly, a humble gesture more of acknowledgement than pride, while the castle's stone walls absorbed their quiet echoes like silent witnesses. Outside, the winter night pressed on, indifferent once more, as if nothing had changed, and perhaps nothing needed to. Here, amid simple candles and simple songs, lay a truth. Even within the slow, quiet fabric of daily life, human connection persisted in small, enduring moments. Looking back on such nights, it becomes clear that the true power of these low-key traditions lay in their unpretentious beauty, woven into the fabric of everyday existence. The candles, now burned low, seemed less like ritual objects than small, ageless anchors, holding their stories steady against the slow tide of time. The forgotten carols, once sung with effort and irony, lingered in the warm corners of memory, remnants of a quiet human effort to find meaning in simplicity. As the castle fell silent once more, the faint scent of wax and old wood remained, a gentle reminder that even the humblest acts, like singing or candlelit moments, can hold the weight of history, however unassuming. In these small, enduring nights, humanity's quiet endurance quietly whispered through generations, never demanding, always there. In the quiet hours of winter, the castle's great hall was softly illuminated by a line of flickering candles, their gentle flames casting warm amber pools on the stone floor. Here a small group gathered, their voices low and tentative as they began to sing familiar carols, the words almost lost in the hum of old wooden beams and distant footsteps. The tradition was humble, almost unnoticed by the outside world. Yet, within these walls, it carried a weight of unspoken continuity, an act of quiet devotion to a shared human rhythm. The candles' steady glow seemed to synchronize with their slow, deliberate melodies, creating a fragile bridge between the flickering present and distant memories. As they sang, the uncertainty of the season itself faded into the calm of small, fleeting moments, simple, human, and weakly hopeful. A stir of tension followed when a new hand hesitated, questioning whether such a modest ritual still mattered amidst the grand affairs of the castle. The whisper of doubt floated through the room like a chill, as some observed the flicker of flame against the waning candle wax, unsure if these low-key carols retained their relevance. A few voices faltered, the quiet irony of tradition clinging faintly to their cautious singing, which seemed almost aware of its own slow decline. Behind a blurred curtain of shadow, the castle's steward listened, perhaps recalling when such customs were more fervent, more urgent, and still the flames persisted, undisturbed, quietly asserting their patience amid the subtle tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of fragile human perseverance in the face of fading customs. An observer might have noted the faint humor in the scene, the soft, almost imperceptible shifts in posture, the way some voices wavered or drifted into a muted yawn, as if the act of singing itself yearned for sleep. An elder, perhaps, with a gentle smirk beneath a veil of blurred shadows, had seen many such traditions come and go, their seriousness softened by the mundane, almost like a memory politely nodding off. The candles, tired and leaning slightly to one side, still burned with quiet stubbornness, no longer eager to shout, but content to burn low. The wall, the worn wood, and the meager ornamentation all echoed the irony of small acts, simple, deliberate, and somehow timeless, particularly as the modern world edged quietly outside these stone walls. The scene forgot itself in a lull of gentle humor and tiny human imperfections. As the last notes drifted into silence, the flickering candles teetered on the edge of exhaustion, their small flames casting a subdued glow that lingered in the still air. The room gradually settled into a peaceful hush, the kind that settles over the castle after a long day, where the only sounds are the faint crackle of extinguished fire and the soft settling of old wooden beams. Within this quiet, the shared reverence for the tradition seemed to deepen, a silent vow to preserve its fragile existence amid the slow march of time. The guests, now contemplative, leaned back or lowered their heads, letting the calm envelopment of the moment wash over them like a gentle tide. The castle's walls, once filled with music and doubt, now echoed with a quiet, firm promise to hold onto small, luminous sparks of human connection against the slow fade of seasons. Looking back, one might see this low-key ritual not merely as an act of musical continuity, but as a small testament to resilience, an ordinary hope whispered through candlelight in aging stone corridors. These gentle traditions, often overlooked, carry an unmistakable human dignity, a stubborn refusal to let the faint glow of memory dim entirely. The blurred faces and sleepily amused expressions of those involved reflect a universal scene of human imperfection, lingering doubts, softened by a shared sense of enduring modesty. And in the slow, flickering shadows, there remains a quiet beauty, the acknowledgement that while nothing lasts forever, small acts like gentle singing beneath candlelight quietly tether us, if only for a moment, to something deeply human and mildly absurd. As the winter of 1347 settled over the stone walls of the castle, Master Cook Aldrich and his apprentices gathered in the dimly lit kitchen, where flickering candles cast long shadows on wooden surfaces. The air was thick with the scent of dried herbs and bread dough, and a faint hum of activity filled the silent, snowbound halls. The preparations for the grand Christmas feast had begun, each movement deliberate and quiet, an unspoken acknowledgement of the season's quiet anticipation. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, indifferent to the bustling, yet muted efforts within. It was a scene of routine, softened by the gentle glow of warmth and the soft clatter of utensils, as if the castle itself was holding its breath for a moment of peace. Then, as days passed, a slow pressure mounted, snow fell relentless, blocking the supply routes early in the season, and the pantry supplies flickered with uncertainty. Aldrich and his team exchanged tired glances over scarce jars of preserved fruits and root vegetables that now seemed insufficient for both the household and the looming holiday cheer. The kitchen once brimming with the promise of lavish dishes, now faced a quiet dilemma. How to craft a feast with dwindling ingredients, each decision weighed down by the unspoken worry of shortage. There was a strange irony in their efforts, an elaborate meal reduced to modesty, as if the very act of feasting was subtly subdued by the icy grip of winter outside. Still, they pressed on, with pragmatic quiet as their only resolve. Amidst the moonlit nights, a trace of human humor emerged, almost misplaced amid the austerity. Aldrich, with a wry smile, remarked how the lords might be pleased with a feast of roots and dreams. If only the meat could be conjured from thin air. The kitchen staff chuckled softly, sharing the irony that their grand holiday plans were now little more than humble songs of seasoning and boiling. The exaggerated importance of their modest offerings contrasted sharply with the silent emptiness outside, evoking a gentle, almost humorous sigh from the old stone walls. Even in hardship, there was a fragile, quiet amusement, reminding everyone that in human effort, humor often lingered just beneath the surface, waiting patiently for its turn. The season's quiet humor softened their burden, reminding them that no feast is perfect or eternal. As the snowfall persisted, the weather's stubborn silence seemed to settle deeper into the castle's bones, and the kitchen took on a calm, measured rhythm, an acceptance of what was, rather than what was hoped for. The supplies, though still scarce, were carefully rationed with a gentle precision that bordered on the ceremonial, their simple preparations becoming a small act of quiet resilience. The family, tucked away in their chambers, might miss their usual opulence, but in the stillness there was a sense of peace, a moment of collective pause, where the worries of scarcity intertwined with the calm assurance of shared human effort. The muted light of the hearth flickered gently, casting a soothing glow that seemed to soften the sharp edges of their winter struggle. In this calm, the true quiet of the season revealed itself, less a time of abundance, more a time of gentle endurance. Looking back on that winter, it is hard not to sense the quiet dignity in the castle's modest celebration, the slow, deliberate adaptation to unforeseen hardship. The feast had become a simple mosaic of preserved vegetables, bread, and whatever small tokens of warmth could be gathered. It was not what they had dreamed of, yet it carried a quiet human grace. Each modest plate a testament to patience and pragmatic hope. The castle's kitchen, with its worn wooden tools and silent, sleepy apprentices, offered a soft reminder. Human effort often resides in the small, unnoticed moments, countless quiet adjustments made over years, seasons, and centuries. The season passed, as seasons do, leaving behind only faint memories of hardship softened by time and reflection, etching into history the soft, steady rhythm of life beneath the relentless winter sky.